Hello, I am Ben. This is the Garmin Forerunner 965. But is it any good? You may well have seen this watch lighting up social media quite literally because of its new fancy screen. This is a AMOLED OLED screen that Garmin have put in the Forerunner 965. It's seen in other watches in their ranges. The Venue 2 Plus has it, but it's now in the 265 and the 965 in the Forerunner range, and it's the first time a screen like this has been put into a Forerunner. And that in itself is a significant move because the Forerunner is the classic running watch range from Garmin. Not necessarily a smartwatch. They do lots of smartwatches already which feature nice screens, but this is the first time the Forerunner range has had it. So what does that mean? Well, it's basically the same watch as the very, very good 955, its predecessor. But as I say, this had an LCD screen, this now has an OLED screen. This means that the casing is different, the sizing is slightly different, the weight is pretty much the same, there's a gram in it. But functionality wise, there are a few key differences now between these watches which will be important to runners. The main one is that the screen is much brighter, it's clearer. It has snazzy graphics when you load up a run. It has someone running, and it's, visually it's very, very impressive. It's a touch screen, much like the 955. The 955 was a touch screen, but the screen is slightly larger. The beveled edge means that you kind of feel slightly smoother in your transitions when you're swiping on the screen. It just looks and feels much more like a smartwatch than a Forerunner. Now that might be absolutely fine for some people, but for others, they want that traditional Forerunner feel, and a bright screen might not be the thing for them. Now, OLED screens versus LCD screens does have an impact on battery life. The 965 in ultra track mode, which is Garmin's most sort of battery saving mega ultra run mode you can have in, this has about 34 hours of use. The 955 has up to 80. So we're talking a few days of extra battery life comparatively when we're talking about the 955 and the 965. Now, maybe not all of that is down to the screen, but a lot of that will come down to this new screen requiring more battery to power it. That's going to be significant for a small number of runners who are actually buying this watch to do multiple day ultra running races. For everyone else, battery life is not really an issue. I've had this watch for a few weeks now. I've probably charged it 3 or 4 times. It's not a big deal. I've been using it consistently with all of my running training and some of my bike riding. I wear it at night to monitor my sleep. It's basically on my wrist 24/7, and the battery is excellent. Perhaps if you're wanting to run for many, many days and many, many miles, not the watch for you. There are other ultra watches for that, but it is worth knowing that the battery life is not quite as good as its predecessor, particularly as this watch is £600. Predecessor now slightly cheaper. Is your money going to go? The other thing to note with the screen development is the casing has changed. Now, it actually feels much sleeker than the predecessor. The 955 has that sort of slightly more sort of like rugged aesthetic and feel to it, more similar to sort of other sort of like adventure ultra watches within the running world. This has definitely got more of a smartwatch aesthetic. It's sleeker. The strap is nicely contoured around the sort of the body of the watch, and the buttons have changed a bit. Now, the start-stop button is bigger on the 965, but they do not protrude as much as the 955, and they're not as tactile as the 955. The 955 very much had consistent like Forerunner button feel, quite a lot of compression when you're going along, so very, very tactile in the feedback when you press the button, when you haven't pressed the button. Slight problem with this is that when you're running hard and you want to, pause a watch after intervals or something like that, you kind of want that reassuring tactile button push. Not so much with this. The buttons feel much sort of closer to the casing. You don't get the same feedback on button press that you do with this watch. Now that might not be a problem for anybody, but it's very much worth noting that if you're used to a certain feedback and amount of feedback to reassure you that you've started a watch or stopped a watch or lapped your watch, the Forerunner 955 and previous Forerunners have always had a slightly larger button press. This doesn't have that so much. This more sits within the smartwatch feel with a watch. Aside from these differences, very, very good running watches. The list of things that these things can do is absolutely enormous. I'm not going to go through it. If you're an everyday runner, from beginner all the way through to ultra, these watches will be able to do what you need them to do. The major thing will be where you want to spend your money on battery life and the feel and the look of a watch. Two these two very much now are different. The Forerunner 965 does feel very different from the 955. It will appeal to many who want to have a watch that they can use on an everyday basis that feels slightly less intrusive. Is it a true classic Forerunner? Perhaps not. Does that matter? Completely up to you. But it is an evolution of a running watch, certainly, and I don't think the OLED screen is going to go anywhere anytime soon. So if you're looking to buy a watch and you want a bright, snazzy screen, this is the watch for you.